computer. All right, it's recording. So hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you being here. We are going to start today with the Adolescent Brain and Drugs with a Protecting You and Protecting Me program coordinator, Vanessa DeRosa. And we're really excited to show you the information and hopefully give you new resources and information that you can use in your day-to-day life. So who are we? First of all, hello. I think you've seen me many times before, but my name is Ruth Del Pino. I'm a prevention educator for the Mercer Council on alcoholism and drug addiction, or vice versa. I can never get that right. I'm also the Mercer County coordinator. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Global Studies, Political Science, American Studies, with a certificate in teaching English as a foreign language, life skills training, and leadership. So Vanessa?
Hi, I'm Vanessa DeRosa. I'm program coordinator for the Protecting You, Protecting Me program. It's an alcohol use prevention program for children in grades K through 5. And I have a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and a Master's degree in Social Work.
So very relevant. I always start us off with why this presentation. Once again, this is a presentation that's not to scare you, it is to inform you. This is also not a parenting class. You are the best parent for your child. You know them the best. You've known them longer than they've known themselves. My perspective is shaped by my approach and my learning experience. So anything that I learned at the council, anything that I learned while being a prevention educator is something that I put in these presentations. It is also evidence informed and some evidence based. So evidence informed meaning I take the research, the resources and all of that stuff, and I put it together in a centralized way so that you guys can reference it later. And also some evidence-based in terms of that I reference studies and programs that are evidence-based and empirically founded. So without further ado, we're going to get started. And first off, we have Vanessa.
Okay. So as mentioned in the intro, my role at Mercer Council is facilitating an alcohol use prevention program for students in grades K through 5 called Protecting You, Protecting Me. The main goal of the program is to prevent injury and death of children and youth due to underage consumption of alcoholic beverages. So in the program, children learn that their brains are the boss of their body, the most important part of their body, and in charge of everything that their body does. They learn things that can harm their brain and body as they grow and develop, such as alcohol and the reasons why. And they learn things that can protect their brain and the rest of the body as they grow and develop. They learn their minds are under construction, and they hold the power to shape and construct it to be the healthiest it could be as they grow. I decided to show this Bitmoji scene I created for a second grade lesson I did, because I'll be discussing what exactly it means for young minds to be under construction, the parts of the brain that are not fully developed yet, and how because of this can put youth at risk for drug addiction.
Okay.
Okay, so here you see the slide minds under construction, prefrontal and limbic system. So the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which you see in the picture, the brain on the upper right in the blue shaded area, is the prefrontal cortex. And that's the area responsible for critical thinking and weighing the pros and cons of making decisions. So that's not fully developed until a person's in their mid-20s. So with this part of the brain not fully developed, there's an automatic tendency for teens to resort to the limbic system instead to make decisions. And then the limbic system is shown in the picture of the brain on the bottom left. So the limbic system is more associated with emotions and reward seeking and feelings of pleasure. So this obviously will lead them to take more risks than adults, that instant gratification. If a teen is confronted by their peer to pull a prank on someone, and this could lead them to get into trouble, the teen brain focuses less on the consequences and more on the reward, which is getting the peer's acceptance. Of course, taking chances isn't always a bad thing. It helps us grow and it helps us learn and grow, but not thinking of the consequences could be detrimental when it comes to drugs and alcohol.
So when you say taking chances, is taking chances something like, I don't know, saying yes to something exciting like a talent show versus saying yes to alcohol? Is that the comparison we're making?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So also I had a question about the formation of the brain. So a lot of the time when I'm teaching the formation of the brain, I sort of look at it how it develops from the back to the front. Is that usually how it happens? Is that like a good scenario for people teaching this to understand the formation of the brain?
Yes, that is correct. Mhm.
Okay. So obviously, like I have a lot of the time where I have children exercise where they put their hands on the back of their heads and they sort of feel around and they just say, "Oh, like that's fully formed." And then the more further they go forward, the less developed it can be. So I find that really interesting. Thank you. As Vanessa had sort of alluded to and sort of talked about, making decisions in the prefrontal cortex that is developed is something that's developed in the mid 20s, and mid 20s meaning 24, 25, 26, in that age range. And so when we were talking about age matters. And we say children, but we don't necessarily mean children as 5-year-olds, and children are inclusive in 15-year-olds. When it comes to the law, obviously, anyone under 18 years old is included in that system. But more specifically, when we're talking about age mattering, we're talking about the development of the brain, right? So when you have decision making skills, a 5-year-old is less likely to understand saying no to alcohol is a bad thing versus a 15-year-old. Obviously, there are nuances there when it comes to that. So a 5-year-old, if you tell them to say no, they're more likely to say no. But a 15-year-old is more likely to understand why they say no. So that's definitely a difference there. Also, when we are looking at the decision-making skills that age has, a 15-year-old has a different set of rules when they are moving through day-to-day life, right? So obviously, a 5-year-old has nap time, a 15-year-old doesn't. I mean, nap time is wonderful for any age, but that's just what it is. They have different needs, they have different wants, they're socialized differently. A 5-year-old, when they're looking through something, doesn't have the same decision-making skills. So when we're sort of looking at this, we want to look at graded responsibility. And what that means is what is age appropriate when we are helping them become, fully functioning adults of the world, right? So, what chores do they have? What are they in charge of? Are they in charge of homework? Are they in charge of getting a sibling to school? Are they in charge of cleaning their room, choosing what to wear? All of those things, right? So, when we sort of look at that, we want to make sure that, what we give children is age appropriate to their development. Also, what are the best consequences for actions? A timeout is obviously different than taking away the car keys, for a person who's 16 driving a car. So when we sort of have these kinds of consequences, we want to make them age appropriate. We want them to understand the consequences, but also get familiar with their own autonomy. Because when they have their own autonomy, they make decisions for themselves. And so there's this self-driving motivation for them to make the best decisions so that their autonomy isn't compromised, right? So when we teach them how to do that with age appropriate consequences and things that they're in charge of, it makes it a lot easier to explain and for them to understand the world as their brain is developing, and they most likely will interact with substances later on. Vanessa, anything to add?
Um, in speaking about discussing, drugs and alcohol to younger children, as opposed to older, teenagers, older children, teenagers. So in my program, I teach the younger students the more immediate effects of alcohol. So I just had it my class this morning. I was teaching the children about how alcohol can give people bad breath, give them headaches, make it hard for them to see, to talk, to move, to walk. So more so like immediate effects, whereas obviously as age progresses, um, discussing more about the long, term effects, damage to organs and such, which I do, touch upon with the younger students, but it's more the immediate effects.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that is also important, because the age appropriateness of teaching about substances is also important. So the older you get, the more into the long-term effects you get, right? Because, there's more at stake when you're older and you're interacting with those substances. So, the short-term effects are really important to learn, and the long-term effects are usually learned later on because you already know what the short-term effects are. So it adds a dimension to the age appropriate learning experience, right? So definitely. Also, Vanessa had found a wonderful video on the teen brain development, because this is something that a lot of people, and this is the age group, right, that is really interested in understanding substance use and possibly interacting with substances. So this is actually from the National Institute of Health, and it can be found on YouTube. I will have a link to their presentation and to their YouTube video in the description of the YouTube video. So as you're going through, you can look at the resources there. And here we go. This is also, excuse me, this is also presented by a teenager, so it's really relevant.
As teens, people are always telling us what we can't do. Do you ever wonder why that is? Why can't I stay up late? What could happen if I just play for 15 more minutes? Who cares if I smoke a joint every now and then? Let's face it, adults may mean well, but they can't really explain why they won't let us do this stuff. The thing is, there's actually a really cool explanation, and it has to do with our brains. From the outside, the brain of a newborn looks just like a smaller version of an adult brain, but there's a big difference. There's a ton of stuff that still needs to be programmed into a young person's brain. That's where our life experiences come in. How we interact with what's around us shapes our brains until we're in our mid-20s. We can't feel our brains changing, but they are super busy building circuits and programming. So how does this happen? Every little thing that happens to us can change our brain in huge ways. At short distances, our experiences can make or break connections between brain cells. By guiding the creation of circuits, experiences shape our perceptions, memories, and everything that makes us unique. But they also affect our brain across longer distances. This involves the construction of thick bundles of fibers that connect different brain regions. By creating this complex network, experiences help increase the brain's bandwidth, allowing it to work better and better. But you gotta keep in mind, these short and long-range connections are influenced by everything we do and everything that happens to us. But this is awesome news. It means we are the programmers of our brains. Every decision, good or bad, influences how our brain develops. Let's talk about taking drugs. For example, pretend this is the keyboard you are using to program your brain. Using drugs just for fun or to get high would be like scrambling the letters on the keyboard. Now, if you scramble the letters on the keyboard after the program is written, that can lead to temporary errors or make it hard for the program to run for a while. But if you scramble the letters while the program is being written, the program can incorporate catastrophic, long-lasting glitches. This is why teens are better off without drugs. We are in the middle of coding our brains, and drugs can cause real problems that can last a long time. And yet, drugs are just one of the many possible ways of scrambling our keyboards. For example, not enough sleep, lack of exercise, or eating too much junk food can also harm our brain programs. So yeah, I get it. It's annoying to be told what we can and can't do, but I would rather focus on my ability to shape my brain through smarter decisions. It turns out we have far more control than we thought. We can use this information to choose our own paths and give ourselves the best possible futures.
So I really like that presentation and that video, because it draws a lot of good comparisons and a lot of metaphors that I think it's very digestible for children and teenagers to understand. Also, I do have here SciShow. It is also a YouTube channel that talks about the teen brain. This video specifically about the teen brain, but it talks about a lot of things about brain development, understanding substances, and a lot of science when it comes to the body. So SciShow is also a great one, and a channel that will be listed in the description below as well. Anything to add, Vanessa?
Such an intricate system, our neurons.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool to look at.
I think it's awesome for a lot of reasons, but I really like the idea of having a keyboard. You know, our systems are uploading onto a drive or onto a system, right? And all of a sudden, you know, our brains are something that is just so intricate and so important that we take the responsibility of making sure they're the best they can be, right? So I think it's awesome. I think it's a really good comparison. So yeah, here we go. We're moving forward. Oh, this always happens. All right, here we go. All right. Vanessa, that's all you.
Okay, so this slide shows the role of dopamine in addiction risk. So dopamine is a chemical that helps transmit signals in the brain. Rewarding activities such as eating your favorite food, music, seeing someone you love, or engaging in other pleasurable activities will release dopamine in the brain. But as you can see in this picture on the slide, an influx of dopamine is released when a person takes drugs. Repeated drug use can teach the brain to seek and favor these substances over other healthier rewards. And this is addiction. Because adolescents' limbic systems are extremely sensitive to dopamine, this puts them at an increased risk of craving drugs more strongly than adults.
So when you have it here, I can sort of see how the dopamine interacts with the brain, right? So we have on the left side, while eating food, I think, food, especially if it tastes good, can be really rewarding. And especially if it's good for your body, that's also really important. So that releases a lot of good dopamine. And obviously the cocaine has an excess of dopamine, right? So I wanted to ask, is there anything like that sort of, I know that they call them natural highs. So is there anything that supplements or that is akin to or is equated to using a drug versus having a natural activity? I mean, would there be like, I know, for example, like natural highs for me when I'm looking at them, is it like, um, the brain going on a roller coaster? Like that's a really exciting thing, right? So I think that while we're looking at this, we can also understand that, the dopamine addiction is definitely a thing because your brain gets used to it when it's interacting with substances, but also that there are other things that supplement what drug use could do to your brain, right? And it doesn't alter the formation of the brain the same way. So when you're riding a roller coaster, you have a lot of dopamines, but that doesn't mean you're going to get addicted to riding a roller coaster the same way you'd get addicted to using cocaine. Am I understanding that correctly?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean that's definitely something interesting, and also we can supplement a lot natural highs for that too. So here we go. Synapses. This is going to be really interesting.
Okay, so right, this slide synapse. So if you look at the picture, what you see as labeled A, B, and C are neurons, which are the brain's nerve cells. So each neuron has three components to it: dendrites, which look like the little branches that extend from it, the soma, which is the cell body that's in the middle, and the axon is along. I call it the information highway to the students that I teach. Neurons help transmit information to other nerve cells, so they are essential for every action that our brain and body carry out. The gap between them that you see in the picture is the synapse, which helps the transferring of signals from one neuron to the next. So as a person grows and learns new things, there's what's called a synaptic pruning, which happens between the pathways of neurons. So it strengthens those that are used while getting rid of those that are not.
Interesting. So is it sort of like exercising a muscle? Like the
Exactly.
stronger you, okay. All right.
Brain is a muscle. Yep.
Okay. So I mean, yeah, that's something weird to think about, right? That the brain is a muscle. So the more you use it, the more you interact with it, the more solidified something becomes, right?
Mhm.
So I don't know, I find that interesting, but also when you're talking about synapses, are synapses something that happen like for later on in life? Is that something that synapses constantly make throughout their life, like those connections? Or is it something that really is for development?
I believe both. Don't quote me on that, but I
Okay, fair
believe
enough.
it's a natural progression through, especially during development, that I definitely I'm sure of. So,
Yeah, so I mean that's so interesting that the younger you are, the more you can exercise your brain, and the more you exercise your brain, the stronger it becomes. I think that's so interesting, and such a good fact to know.
oh yeah,
Um,
and I talk a lot about that in with the students I teach. The growth mindset. There's a lot of resources out there about that growth mindset.
so what's the growth mindset?
Well, basically, what the basically the learning about new things, building on what you already know, helps just to build those synapse connections.
Yeah, I also find that that would probably supplement a lot for oh, we have something in the chat here. So So the literal meaning of muscle memory, I think, right? Yeah. Okay. So someone asked in the chat, muscle memory, is that sort of what it means here? Like, is that sort of something like the synapses connecting the information going through the highway, the information highway? Is it actually technically muscle memory? Because I mean, the brain is a muscle, right? So it would be muscle
Right.
memory. I someone's just trying to be funny. Okay, so that's pretty awesome. I like the concept of that. Okay, next
Okay,
synapse.
so these synapse connections are what help us process information in our world. So this network of synapses supports everything from our memory to our ability to learn, and also our ability to feel emotions. A teen's brain that is exposed to drugs and alcohol will have disorganized pathways in their brain. So talking about what we viewed in the video about the disorganized keyboard. So disorganized pathways in their brain and changes to their brain function. So this can affect their attention, memory, and problem solving that can last through adulthood. So that's why thinking through one's actions and strengthening connections in the brain at an early age by learning new things can have a lasting positive effect on a young person's brain's growth and development and last throughout their life. And in Protecting You, Protecting Me, I really hone in on this, thinking through one's actions. I help the children realize the importance of thinking things through, stopping, thinking things through, asking questions, and never trusting their lives to luck.
I love it. Yeah, so that's really important too. And when we sort of have like synapses, and we understand the information that it happens. So I sort of been wondering, what happens if like is it that the synapses, when they're constantly used, that's the way that they're set. So the more that they're used, that's the way that they process information. So if it's something that's reinforced, is that reinforcement what happens?
Exactly. That's a
Oh,
great way to put it. Yes.
okay. All right. Good to know. So for me, we're going to be switching a little bit because we're going to be talking about substances. Substances interacting with the brain, because obviously it's the adolescent brain and drugs. But more specifically, when we're talking about marijuana and the brain, how does it affect the brain? A lot of people are like, oh, marijuana and the brain, like it's not the worst thing out there. And it's like, no, it's not. Heroin, objectively is worse for your body, especially if you use it in excess. But if we're talking about it affecting the brain specifically, a lot of people wonder how it interacts with the brain chemicals. And the best way to put this is that THC THC is tetrahydrocannabinoid, and this is something that is the active psychosomatic drug in marijuana. If you want to learn more about marijuana, there are plenty of videos, resources on this channel that you can use at your disposal. And if you want to learn more about marijuana, you can go to one of those videos. But essentially, in any of those videos, I talk about THC and how it is something that really interacts with your brain. So THC actually has a chemical structure that is similar to a brain chemical called, and I'm so sorry if I butcher this, anandamide. I don't know how to say that in particular, but anandamide, and it's a similar structure that allows the body to recognize THC and alter normal brain function. So we have something called endocannabinoids in our brain, and they function as neurotransmitters, and they send chemical messages between nerve cells, which are neurons, and throughout the system. So they affect brain areas that influence pleasure, memory, mobility, concentration, coordination, and sensory and time perception. So things might seem slower, things might seem faster if you are engaging in a THC in some capacity. So because of the similarity, THC actually attaches itself to the cannabinoid receptors and on these neurons in these brain areas and activates them. So I just find that really interesting that it's something that already occurs in our brain. And then there's a chemical outside of our brain that's outside naturally of what our brain and our body produces that interacts with our body that has a very similar chemical structure and fits very nicely in the way that our brain functions. So that's why a lot of people are concerned about marijuana in the brain, because of the chemical structure that exists and the way it interacts with our brain as it goes through. So there are a lot of areas there that are of concern. And so they have profound effects on the endocannabinoid system if it is used too often and it is used too readily. Also, there are long-term effects. Marijuana in the brain has a huge effect on hippocampus, which is basically where a lot of the memory is stored, if I'm not mistaken, Vanessa. Is that where the memories? Okay, so where the memory is stored, and the orbitofrontal cortex that enables new memories and shifts attention and focus. So the immediate long-term effects would be some cognitive impairment, memory loss, likelihood to use other drugs, increased marijuana tolerance and marijuana dependence. And marijuana dependence is something that is explored in another video, but if you are interested in that, you can definitely refer to those, and those will also be referenced in the YouTube description. Some of the short-term effects include difficulty judging distances, difficulty remembering, fatigue, confusion, paranoia, anxiety. Also, if you have been using it for too long, it can have growing rates of depression and anxiety present in children specifically because it interacts with their brain chemicals so readily. So there are a lot of definite long-term effects and short-term effects to be aware of. The sort of saying here is that the longer you wait to have substances, the longer you wait to engage in those substances, the likelihood of it messing with your brain is less than if you were to start using at 13 and having to be a daily user and being dependent on that substance. So we're going to be, if you have any questions, obviously you can put them in the chat, or any concerns or anything like that, you can put that in the chat as well. Okay, alcohol.
Okay, so because I teach about the effects of alcohol in the developing brain, I wanted to share with you the parts of the brain that's affected by this substance. So first off, we have the central nervous system. So this consists of the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. So alcohol and other drugs can distort, confuse, slow down, and sometimes even block messages between the brain and the rest of the body. When impaired by alcohol, the central nervous system slows down and has difficulty functioning and reacting. Okay. And also another part of the brain that's affected is the cerebellum. And this is in charge of physical and verbal coordination. So when the developing brain is impaired by alcohol, the cerebellum slows down, impairing all voluntary and learned motor controls such as walking and talking. So slowing down is the common theme here that you'll recognize through each of the points that I make about the brain, different brain parts affected by alcohol. Next is the frontal lobe. So we talked about that. So the frontal lobe is in charge of higher cognitive functions, and alcohol can affect a person's ability then to make smart choices. Next, the medulla, that's responsible for all of our cardiac and respiratory functions. So when impaired by alcohol, it can slow down or stop working, causing you to stop eating, breathing, or pumping blood to the body. Another area of the brain affected by alcohol is the hippocampus, which was mentioned. The hippocampus is in charge of processing, storing, and categorizing memories. So when impaired by alcohol, the function of the hippocampus begins to falter, and it becomes harder for the brain to create and retain memories. And then the hypothalamus, that is the part of the brain responsible for regulating our body temperature, thirst, hunger, and other bodily functions. So when impaired by alcohol, it can cause an imbalance, leading to decreased body temperature and a slowed heart rate.
I mean, the hypothalamus, I knew most of these, but the hypothalamus is really interesting. Is it because just of the chemical reaction between alcohol and the brain that it tends to lower the temperature of the body?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. We also have a video that we're going to be talking about alcohol in the brain. And this is something really interesting because one, it's a great resource, which we will be, talking about here. It's a great resource, but it's from a channel that has a lot of good a lot of good content for any child or any parent that is looking to have conversations that are difficult, looking for the vocabulary, looking for much more visual interactions and a lot of visual information. This is all there, and this is something that can be used for people to have conversations with their children that they wouldn't be able to otherwise. So there we go. How alcohol affects your developing brain. And this is from, my apologies, this is from Ask, Listen, Learn. It's a YouTube channel, but also a great resource for anyone wanting to learn about brain development and children.
Butter and toast.
Mix.
Robots and tacos.
Sorta mix.
But kids and alcohol.
Don't mix. You probably heard that alcohol is bad for your brain. But what does that actually mean?
To answer that question, we'll have to learn a little bit about neuroscience, the study of the brain and nervous system.
The brain is your body's control center. It processes information to and from your senses and manages vital and voluntary actions like breathing or keeping a regular heartbeat. It enables you to run and play, learn new facts and ideas, and feel a wide range of emotions.
To do all of these jobs, your brain contains many different parts. Each part is focused on a specific function, like movement, decision-making, memory, pretty much everything.
The brain transmits information throughout the body using a system of interconnected nerve cells called neurons. Chemical messengers called neurotransmitters carefully move the information from one neuron to the next.
Spoiler alert, these messengers play a key role in the way alcohol affects the brain. But hang on, we're getting there. Now, neurotransmitters can either be excitatory, meaning they stimulate brain activity, or inhibitory, meaning they slow down brain activity. To keep its operations going smoothly, the brain has to maintain a careful chemical balance between these two types of neurotransmitters.
Now let's see what happens when you introduce alcohol to this finely tuned system. To start, alcohol acts as an agonist or booster to certain chemicals in the brain's internal reward system. That's what can give people the relaxed feeling you may have heard about.
But alcohol also acts as an agonist to inhibitory neurotransmitters, increasing their ability to slow down brain functions. Simultaneously, it acts as an antagonist to excitatory neurotransmitters, decreasing their ability to stimulate brain activity.
You can probably guess what happens when you combine ramped up inhibitory neurotransmitters with dulled down excitatory neurotransmitters. All of your brain's different parts and functions become super slowed down, which can cause a wide range of physical, mental, and emotional effects.
For example, if too much alcohol hits your cerebellum, which is important for coordination, you might lose your balance and fall.
If alcohol impairs your hippocampus, where memories are made, you might have a hard time holding on to new information, like someone's name you just met, or where you left your phone.
And when alcohol hits your cerebral cortex, which has an important role in feelings and decisions, you may find it hard to control your emotions and get very sad or very angry for apparently no reason. Basically, as alcohol mixes with the different parts of your brain, it makes it a lot harder for them to do their specific jobs.
In time, these short-term effects of alcohol wear off as alcohol leaves the system, though a drinker may experience a sick feeling known as a hangover the next day.
But if a person continues drinking too much, it can have serious long-term effects. The brain will begin to chemically compensate for the way alcohol affects it, and in time, will start to rely on alcohol to function normally. This can lead to dependency, addiction, and other serious health problems.
As a young person with a still developing brain, alcohol can have a stronger effect on you than on adults.
Learning the facts can help you make healthy decisions. So say yes to a healthy lifestyle and no to underage drinking.
To learn more, visit asklistenlearn.org.
I love the visuals in that video. I think it adds a lot to the content, right?
Oh, yeah.
I also think that something really important here is to discuss just briefly the long-term effects of the brain, right? So it talks about not being able to control your own emotions, not being able to remember people's names, and also your body becoming completely dependent on alcohol. And also they have excitatory and what was the other one? Excitatory and
Inhibitory.
Okay, inhibitory is obviously the name depressant and stimulant comes from that. So alcohol is considered a depressant for that reason, because it inhibits a lot of the brain activity, and it slows down whatever capacity you have to function normally. So I find that really interesting. And also that these scientific names are kind of gluing themselves together so people can understand the context of the names that we give them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel like this video is very helpful for children, but also for teenagers, also for adults, people of all ages. It makes it very easy to understand what could be a very complicated, a complicated thing. So
Yeah, my favorite part was watching the brain try to like click the different
right.
different buttons. One of my
Universal
best
brain.
visual ever.
Right.
But yeah, it shows that the brain really does try to work hard for
And they
for
also
things.
have, sorry to interrupt, but they
No,
have
totally fine.
a new video up that explains the effects of marijuana on the developing brain.
I love that. That is
So that
great.
was
And I will
useful.
also link that video below in the resources. So anybody that wants access to that can have access to that.
Great.
So we're going to be talking about prescription medication in the brain just briefly, because prescription medication is a very complicated topic. And if you are looking for something that has a lot of overall explanation and understanding prescription medication in the brain, I actually did a presentation about 2 weeks ago on prescription medication and over-the-counter drugs and its interaction with the body. So if you have any pressing questions on something like that, that is a reference you can refer to. I also have a lot of references and resources below in the YouTube description. So if you are looking for answers that may not be answered here, it's definitely answered there. So we're going to be talking briefly about prescription medication in the brain, but more specifically, just to reiterate that prescription medication can and does hijack parts of the brain in order for it to function properly. Hijacking is kind of not a great word, but if you use it too often, it can hijack the centers of the brain for them to sort of have you make decisions that you normally wouldn't. So this obviously affects the decision-making parts of the brain. And a lot of people wonder, how does it affect their child? I just want to put out there that there is a study by the American Association of Pediatrics that talked about prescription use and drugs and co-concurrent conditions. They found that 19 point, and this is 2013 to 2014. So obviously the numbers can be skewed. The numbers do change over time, but the trends we are seeing really just do specifically stay the same in the past 10 to 20 years, just because of the medical diagnoses that come through. 19.8% of children and adolescents used at least one prescription medication. Now, one prescription medication can mean anything. It can mean anything from asthma to antidepressants to anti-anxiety to getting rid of infections, something like that, amoxicillin. But more specifically, when they're talking about acute medications are things that really do affect and interact with the body more readily and is something that they need a lot of. So 7.1% of children used acute medications, and concurrent use of prescription medications, meaning more than one or having another use of medication, was 7.5% overall. So you can have someone who takes antidepressants, but also has to take asthma medication. So that's what they're talking about when they are talking about concurrent. So that is something that is concerning, but more so specifically because when you have drug-drug interactions and you have, for example, someone who needs to take anti-anxiety and antidepressant and, albuterol, those things you have to make sure don't affect the formation of the brain. That's why there are a lot of things that people should be advocates for, making sure that your child's brain is being developed correctly, trusting the doctor, but also asking questions that may be hard questions to ask to make sure that your child has the best access and making sure that their brains are developing normally. Because these are substances and these are medications that interact with the brain so readily and so, aggressively in some ways, to make sure that it doesn't change too much the formation of the brain and just supplements what the brain needs and helps the brain form rather than taking away from the formation of it. Also, if you are looking for a resource on children use and children abuse of prescription medication, I have here a study that was done by a recovery center And there was nothing specific that we don't know already. There's not a huge amount of people using prescription medication as children and abusing it. But if you're looking more about the abuse parts of it and the substance use disorders affected by medication, once again, you can refer to my YouTube video for that. Anything to add or any questions that we can put in the chat? I don't think so, but we can use that and move on. Anything to add, Vanessa, about prescription medication?
You covered it good.
Thank you. Also, in the video, I do talk about how people use it in a way that is good and in a way that is bad. And there are several resources for children to understand the difference between medication, drugs, medication abuse, and drug abuse. So lots of good stuff there, and definitely should be referred to. So opioids and alcohol. So opioids, just as a preface, is included in medication. So this includes Vicodin, oxycodone, things like that. A lot of pain medications. Opioid is meant for pain management, and something that a lot of people that have pain and acute pain use. Most people, just stick to Advil and Motrin, but opioid is meant for people that really do suffer throughout their bodies in a very acute way. Okay.
Right. So we wanted to include this slide to discuss this, and it's an especially deadly combination, opioids and alcohol. Both affect the brainstem to slow breathing. So a lack of oxygen equals organ and tissue damage, affecting the brain first, and the damage may not be reversible. So in the picture on the right, it shows when on the top, it shows when no drugs are present. So there's a balance of those excitatory and inhibitory signals, which we viewed in the video about how alcohol affects the developing brain. So again, there's a balance when no drugs are present. There's a balance of excitatory and inhibitory signals, which means that breathing is at an appropriate controlled rate. And then on the picture on the bottom is a picture showing the under the influence of alcohol or opioids. So there is no balance, it's out of balance. So alcohol decreases excitatory signals and increases inhibitory signals, as we learned in the video. And opioids make neurons less responsive to the inhibitory signals. So it's good to touch upon that as well.
Yeah, definitely. And the lack of oxygen, does cause a lot of concern, right? You don't want something, taking away or, adding tissue damage. So especially when you have a developing brain and you have alcohol and opioids interacting with it, it can be a deadly mix, because it really tends to rewrite some of the parts of the brain that you really don't want to be rewritten and you don't want to be damaged. And especially if it's not reversible, that's something that's really concerning, right? Next, we will be talking about mental health disorders and mental health and substance use disorders. I will just talk about this briefly, just so people understand that mental health disorder, all your personality, everything that you enjoy, everything that stimulates you, that delights you, that's all in your brain, right? Your brain is the center of everything that should exist in terms of how you critically think, in terms of how you talk, in terms of how you interact with the day-to-day, because you are absorbing that information and your brain is being written based on the information it receives. So that's all really important stuff for us to understand when it comes to substance use disorder. And your brain, especially when it's talked about in this way, really needs to be protected so that you don't develop a substance use disorder, so that your brain is functioning at its best abilities. So those who may take medicine are more primed for a substance use disorder, and also it may affect the development of the brain. So let's make sure that if you are taking a substance in terms of medication, or if you are using drugs in some capacity, understanding that if you are priming yourself for that earlier on in your life, you're more likely to develop a substance use disorder later on in your life. So if you start something at 13 and you are abusing it, then you are more likely to have a substance use disorder when you are older, like 25, 30. Roughly 50%, and this is just by the United States standards. This is a study that was done on mental health disorders as well as substance use disorders and their interaction. Roughly 50% of individuals with severe mental health disorders are affected by substance use. And severe meaning, severe in terms of how the symptoms are presented. So really hard really, really hard depression, really inhibiting schizophrenia, things like that. So understanding that people who have really intense mental health disorders may also be primed for substance use disorders on top of that. 37% of alcohol abusers and 53% of drug abusers have also had at least one serious mental illness. Of all diagnoses as mentally ill, 29% abuse alcohol or drugs. And there's obviously a common ground here when we're talking about this, because when you don't know how to function in terms of your mental health, you reach for vices that are easy, that help you in the moment, that are immediate, and making sure that if you are taking medication, you don't mix it, as we were talking about before. So there are a lot of different things that talk about here, and also that mental health disorders, people who have this also reach for substances because of the want and the need for their symptoms to go away. So if we give them other things and other vices for their brain to function normally, then hopefully we reduce the amount of substance use disorders that happens in this population. Also understanding that people who have mental health disorders tend to reach for things like marijuana, alcohol, and prescription medication to mitigate some of those things, and giving them tools to cope with anything that they may be fighting in that given moment. If you have any questions about this or any concerns, there are a slew of resources that will be in the description below. So this is technically our last slide. If anybody has any questions, they could put them in the chat. But when you're talking about children and you're saying the brain development, drugs, like all of this stuff is really important stuff for me to understand. How do I sort of help them? How do I help them grow? What's something that can be really useful for them in the future for me to make sure that they become the best versions of themselves they can be? First thing, let them be curious. Let them ask questions. If they ask questions, that means that they're curious, but they're also just wanting to know. If they're asking about it, don't assume that they're using. If they say, "Mom or Dad," or whoever, "What about alcohol? What about marijuana?" Giving them answers that are age appropriate, that are informed, that are evidence-based, helps them understand how it interacts with their body, and therefore gives them tools to understand how they shouldn't use at an early age, and how it helps their brain development later on. Also having open dialogue and conversations, just in general. When you have open dialogue and conversations with children, it really helps them understand that you're there for them. When you start with the small stuff when you're young, then you can eventually have the bigger conversations later. So we want to make sure that you're always open and having an open dialogue and conversation, so that your children can understand that you're always going to be there for them. Be involved in their day-to-day, meaning that if they come home from school, or they log off from school, ask them how their day was, ask them how school was, know who their friends are, understand what their hobbies are, get involved in some of their hobbies. Maybe they really like painting, paint with them. Also give them vocabulary to understand their brain. Vanessa had sort of laid out a wonderful list of vocabulary words that you can use, but also supplementing a lot of that conversation with video can help them understand how their brain functions, how it interacts with substances, and also how it develops later on in life, and how it interacts with the growth of that. And also be open to conversation whenever they are ready, meaning that you have opened the door and hopefully they step through it. And that's all you can do given the situation, given their autonomy, given their circumstances. And also, there are programs, we have prevention educators for a reason, utilizing programs such as Protecting You, Protecting Me, Life Skills, Too Good for Drugs, all of these things that the Mercer Council offers. These are things that can mitigate and be protective factors in your child's brain development. I always close the presentation with a quote, just because I feel it's necessary, but also can be a really poignant point, so that people understand the interactions of the lesson with their children. And it is, we worry about what a child will become tomorrow, yet we forget that they are someone today. And that means that their brains are still developing, but just because their brains are still developing doesn't mean they don't have a personality. It doesn't mean they don't have thoughts. It doesn't mean they can't make decisions. They still have opinions and concerns. And they are developing today for a reason, but we must give them the space to develop in an autonomous way for them to understand their body and for them to grow as a person, to become a fully functioning adult. And respecting, understanding, and honoring that part of a child and honoring that their brain is still developing, but they are still a human is a huge part of their development, but also makes things go smoother when you talk to them and understand where they're coming from. Vanessa, any closing thoughts?
There's a great resource. We didn't list it, but it just came to my head. It's called Neuroscience for Kids. So on that website, especially, there's a ton of resources. There's activities. If children like to do like arts and crafts, I was just thinking that, there's definitely a lot of information there, constructing, the brain out of like Play-Doh, clay, making neurons out of pipe cleaners. I've done that with my students before. So really just tuning into how your child like learns best and really celebrating their strengths, and that can help them in understanding the brain, how it functions, and it could be very helpful.
Lovely. Awesome. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your concern. Thank you for just, wanting to know more. Next week, we'll be talking about teenage desensitization and understanding the desensitization of this generation. So thank you again. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you next week on March 25th at 12 on Thursdays right here. All right. Thank you again. Bye.